Good morning, everyone, and thank you to GIZ for giving me this opportunity to present a comprehensive overview of work done by NGOs and CSOs on traditional knowledge in the Northeast region. My name is Sarala I am by training an ecologist, but I've also worked on common pool resources, and I'm involved in a lot of work, interdisciplinary work related to the environment, natural resource management, and a bit of indigenous knowledge and traditional knowledge, whatever we may say, especially looking at the food systems and agriculture. Next slide please. I'll just say a little bit. I come from Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment, which is a Bangalore headquartered organization. For the past 25 years, we've been working in this part of the world of India. And I head the Northeast office based out of Gangtok. We are a knowledge-based organization, but it also has three facets. We are also recognized as a think tank. We also are an academy. We do also a lot of research, but we are also grassroots implementers. So we are also implementing with project offices, literally working with different community groups, beneficiaries, and different, whatever community groups are there. So I just begin my presentation on a comprehensive knowledge about assessment of what different NGOs and CSOs are doing in Northeast region on traditional knowledge. So as we know, Northeast India represents two of the biodiversity hotspots out of the 34 global biodiversity hotspots, the Himalayas and the Indo-Burma. So Eastern Himalayas is here with us in Northeast India, and Sikkim and Arunachal Pradesh represent that, whereas the rest are in the Indo-Burma hotspot. We also know that there is a very rich aquatic biodiversity, and the different kind of things that you want it to be also tells us how diverse things are over here. From mammals to birds, reptiles, amphibians, fishes, mollusks, insects, crustaceans, aquatic plants, and algae, and whatever was mentioned. We also have very, very diverse ecosystems, as you know, rivers, lakes, streams, ponds, and high altitude bogs, peats. Also, these ecosystems not only also provide ecosystem services as water. I think we are also a source of water, especially a lot of downstream communities depend on that. And all sorts of ecosystem services of water purification, carbon sequestration, flood control, so on and so forth. We also have very diverse indigenous practices of management using traditional knowledge. But we also have a diversity of threats in terms of pollution, infrastructure, development, which all of you are aware of, and I'm not going to go through. Next slide. So the methodology that I followed in this assessment was, I looked at Google Scholar first, especially to start off with peer-reviewed papers about CSOs involved in traditional knowledge practices, to see if any scholars or any researchers had mentioned any CSOs in their research work. Because there is a lot of work, there is a lot of literature out there on traditional knowledge from the region. Then I also used, search words, keywords like non-government, CSOs, practitioners, traditional knowledge, whatever I could find, fishes, mollusks, crustaceans, commons. And then also I looked at the Darpan portal of Niti Aayog to look at the different organizations that were there and what sort of domain of work they were doing, and did they involve any work, was there any work going on in traditional knowledge. And I also looked at some Give India portal. And then, of course, in all the 8 states, used key informants, be they from NGOs, people who are, researchers, and also people from the government. So the first the first part of this assignment was looking at assessment of current CSOs and NGOs working on traditional knowledge. So taking this, what I did was, so out of the lot of CSOs and NGOs who had some kind of a relationship of working with natural resource management, and a little bit of if they had mentioned some sort of, working on wetland or fishes, I found that there were about 42 NGOs or CSOs from all across this states from the Northeast region. And so from all the 8 states, as you can see, and we saw a lot of people in some ways involved working in Mizoram. So again, this was a challenge because the domain of work that is presented there in these portals is a little difficult because there are paragraphs written about one NGO or CSO has written. So they've written environment, SDGs, development, women's issues. So everything, it's a kind of a mixture of things that have been presented. So that itself was a challenge to wean out and say that, okay, this is the key focus. And also the contact sometimes presented in many of these portals was also a challenge because when you phone them or you want to get in touch with them, most of them, these are not working. A lot of the CSOs and NGOs also don't have social media, pages. No, they don't have websites. So I forgot to mention, I was also looking at, even if there was some news report, where a newspaper reporter writes about something and also mentions in one word or something, oh, this NGO is working on indigenous knowledge. So I was also trying to see, if there was some sort of, work like that, so which I could collect and, put it in this analysis. So this was not there. So then the key domains of knowledge that I found in all these NGOs, which somehow relate to the traditional knowledge practitioner kind of a domain, was, as you can see, agrobiodiversity. Art and culture I found from a traditional knowledge kind of perspective. Quite a lot of organizations working on, heritage, art, culture, music, fabric, things like that. So that was there, quite a few of them. Art and culture, but art, craft and culture also found a lot of people working. And then those there were a few working on indigenous food systems. Indigenous documentation, knowledge documentation organization is very few. There were some activists on indigenous rights. And then there were very generic kind of a stuff, probably because people don't compartmentalize. I also realized that. If you are a group working, so a lot of people are not compartmentalizing one from the other if they're working on livelihoods. So they're not saying, oh, this part is our traditional knowledge work and this part is general livelihood work. So that itself was a challenge to find out in such assessments because again, this is not an assessment where you are doing field visits and actually talking to a lot of people and discussing and trying to find out what they are doing or concentrating on. And then some on traditional fishing methods, which we could find out. And if these were accessible organizations, you could call up and then really find out that many of them are, a part of their job they may not mention in their portfolio. But yes, they are engaged with communities and some of them are also working on traditional fishing methods and all that. Like, for example, the organization of Dr. Ranjita. So she was accessible. You could call her up and say that, is this, and she could tell me that this is what they are doing or working. So that it was easy. But for many organizations, access to them itself was a problem. But at the same time, many people also suggested organizations like very small groups, farmers group, self-help groups, they are out there working. But again, on a very broad development theme, but also following traditional practices work. So they are also practitioners. But again, I discussed with a few people and we thought, it would be good to bring them here, but again, language was going to be also a barrier to them, especially in discussions that we are going to be having. It's going to be in English. So unless you have, interpretation and translation facilities around. So that itself was also going to be a barrier. So we thought there must be a way after this, when we find out an action plan after this workshop about, how do we also integrate them in discussions like this, where they are able to freely also discuss and share with us and give us also feedback from their experiences as practitioners. So these were the key domains. And after that, list of CSOs was the other work that I had to do, who can give inputs on traditional knowledge. And these were the 13 civil society organizations as well as NGOs, who I felt from the assessment was somewhere linked to really doing traditional knowledge practitioner kind of work and would be able to really provide feedback to us. So not about us telling them to do things, but also they were, through their knowledge and through their years of experience and expertise on the field, would be able to provide feedback to the project. So one is the Jiva Suraksha Assam, which is also working on traditional fishing. The other one is the Paboy Greens. It was interesting because they are a private organization. So I also wanted to, because we always talk of private-public and public-private kind of partnerships. And always in such things, we tend to sometimes leave out the private entities. So we thought, why not? And then he's been doing a lot of work on, anyway, preserving heirloom crops. And then he's also started doing these fish breeding of local commercial breeds in Assam. And also, I think one value he adds is also, the working on market linkages. How do you link communities? And he does work with community groups. The all Loktak areas, so these are some, I think I'll have I can discuss each one in the following other slides. The one in Meghalaya is a little bit of a misfit because they haven't actually worked on aquatic biodiversity resources. They are more into carbon finance and sacred groves conservation. And the others, I put it in grey, but because these are, again, I think, non-priority states. So Arunachal, Mizoram, and Sikkim, as well as Tripura. But I think in the presentation section, when the CSOs share, they do have some knowledge, at least to share, and in future may have the potential of also having collaborations with such projects. So when I talk of Jiva Suraksha Assam, their portfolio is working, they already work with missing community farmers in Sivsagar and Tinsukia districts. And they are experienced in developing plans. Already they've developed plans for wetlands, and that will definitely involve sustainable use of that ecosystem. They've done a lot of work with women who have to be an important stakeholder in this kind of work. And the other thing is they've gone a step further and also worked on value-added products, and they are collaborating with Assam Agriculture University in doing that. So I think the opportunity is there with them, working in the field with local indigenous communities. Their technical knowledge is already there as a CSO or an NGO, and they have the expertise and experience that can be used for traditional knowledge practicing and management of aquatic resources. Paboy Green, as I said, is operating as a private enterprise. They already do heirloom seed conservation and have been instrumental in setting up seed banks, especially in agriculture. So with the example of about 108 varieties of rice that they've been able to set up a bank with. And they have also initiated fish breeding and reproduction of local variety of commercial value fishes. So also adding livelihoods kind of an enhancement to the work. This is a farm which works with market linkages as an entrepreneur, so also adding the entrepreneurial link to the project. Technical knowledge is available, and expertise and experience can be used for enhancing entrepreneurship in aquatic resources. I think when we work with communities, this will also be an important thing. I come to the all Loktak areas Fishermen's Union Manipur, and I think it's a very important organization because they comprise of about 1,000 members, more than 1,000 members I guess now, and they also work as an activist to promote sustainable fishing. And also they've raised voice against developments that have been threatening the ecosystem that they are dependent on, the Loktak Lake. And they are themselves practitioners. So it's a group of practitioners who are, again, strongly, actively working against developments that threaten the ecosystem that they are dependent on. So they are traditional knowledge holders, practitioners, so knowledge holders, practitioners, and also many other aquatic actually resources. Maybe Rajesh will talk in his presentation later. And also it's an opportunity because livelihoods are completely dependent of this group of people on the Komal Pool resource. Mountain Indigenous Knowledge Center Manipur, Athing was also invited, but I don't think she was able to come. I think this organization also has a very important role in working on indigenous rights, knowledge and culture in the hills of Manipur, while all Loktak group work on the plains of Manipur. I think it's also important because there are many who are practicing, are using aquatic resources, have the traditional knowledge from a very long time. So, and this is focused on, especially in the mountains, and a lot of work anyway on water security, conservation of forests. So natural resources, they are quite experienced. And I think the opportunity is to work in the hills of Manipur. This is also a very good NGO. The Northeast Slow Food and Agrobiodiversity Society, NESFAS, many of you have heard about them. Bhakto is here. So preservation of local agrobiodiversity, traditional farming, and also the main work is revitalization of indigenous food systems and agriculture practices. And one very good thing is that even if they are practitioners, they also research organization and also do a lot of advocacy. So also involved in policy. So both research practice and associated policy at the local level. So it's like a package. So although they have not worked particularly on aquatic resources as part of the local food system, but I think their systems is placed, their knowledge is there, their links to communities are already there, and it will be a very good way to involve them in this kind of a project. So as I said, the opportunities, they already work as researcher, practitioner, and policy interface. So they have a very broad overview, will be having a very, very broad overview of this kind of a project. And I think a project like this also needs that. And I think a very strong linkage with the grassroots groups. Northeast Network was also invited, and I had identified them. I don't know if anybody is there. So they work on gender-based discrimination, and I think this is the main. But I think for this, the relevant one is governance and state accountability, and also natural resource management. They work. Again, the opportunity is there. They have both policy and practice interface because it's based on natural resources management. So they have a policy and practice interface and experience of working with women's group, who are the main stakeholders or main custodians of traditional knowledge and through practice. So I think there is an opportunity even for NIN to work as a partner in this project. Center for Indigenous Culture and Environmental Studies, Nagaland. It's a fairly young organization, but I think, and I'll come back to the gaps, but they're doing a very important work on documenting. This is key because we know of the different practices. One challenge for me was, I think, document a comprehensive one place kind of a repository is missing. So, and promotion, protection, and preservation of indigenous knowledge related to natural sciences. Okay, sorry. So the opportunities, they already have indigenous knowledge documentation experiences, and they have a small repository on diverse traditional knowledge practices, at least in Nagaland. And also I think they've done, so I think through his presentation you'll see tomorrow, some kind of documentation of traditional knowledge and aquatic resources management will be presented tomorrow, so they do have experience in that. So some of the key gaps I saw in the institutional capacity was one of the gaps, of course. So organization focus, again, like I said before, this is not a very, it's not a negative kind of a, comment. So organizational focus is generic, and many times it's not traditional knowledge specific, because again, most grassroots or local organizations, they don't compartmentalize things when they work. It's very broad-based. So except NESFAS, who clearly say in their website, and also the Ramlai Society for Traditional Medicine in Mizoram, who work on traditional knowledge-based healthcare systems. But what I was surprised is no scientific literature, as I saw in that, mentions the engagement of CSOs and NGOs in traditional knowledge practices, because I wanted to know the names of NGOs and CSOs even through some research work. I thought some researcher, when they did their scientific experiments in the field, would have taken the help of some of these organizations, and so therefore mentioned them in some of their peer-reviewed articles. I didn't see that. I may have missed that, but I didn't see that. Communication capacity on the work done. Many organizations, as I can say, is their work done, they must be having a lot of achievements, lessons learned for us, but that is not available unless you go and meet them and visit these places, because many of them don't have their own websites. They don't have social media pages. So, like for example, Ranjita's organization also doesn't have that, but I went to her Facebook page also to see if she has written something about her organization. So I was doing all these, tracking down, almost literally like building a dossier on people, but that was also a challenge in itself. So I think, and there's a severe lack of information on grassroots. Sometimes we think of only of these registered organizations, but I know there is a lot of formal and informal organizations, institutions who are practicing these. So that becomes very, very difficult to document, although that's very important because they are grassroots and they are actually the knowledge holders and they are practitioners. And then how do we, the linkages with government policies and schemes, also those kind of information or their capacity to link to some of these, fisheries or whatever schemes that the government may have, that also I found was the capacity to that in many are also not there. So knowledge and information on traditional knowledge practices. So there is dearth of information on practices of traditional knowledge for because again I said no outward communication is there for most of these organizations. And of course, therefore, specific information which is related to traditional knowledge is very scarce. And scarcer is also, or scarcer accessible, I would say. I won't say information is not there, but accessibility to information on traditional practices is scarcer for aquatic resources. So when we were discussing at the beginning with GIZ, so they wanted people who were working on aquatic resources. So that would have been like, I don't know, it would have been very, very difficult to find anyone who's just focused on traditional knowledge practices in managing aquatic biodiversity resources. So if you look at the Google Scholar page, so when you actually look at them, there are more than 60 pages and more actually of peer-reviewed research articles on traditional knowledge. Everything possible there is, plants, animals, you name it, and it's there from the region. But again, really knowledge or mention or information on NGOs or CSOs working on this. So most of these researches again is on ethnomedicine, medicinal plants mainly. Wild edibles is there, work on agriculture, agroforestry, forest management, even ethnozoology is there, and a little bit of fish. But other than that, I think there's a lot of information missing on these other domains. And information on CSOs and NGOs working as practitioners completely absent in scientific literature. Thematically, I think documentation of experiences, successes, failures, and challenges of traditional knowledge practices from this group is absent. Also on aquatic resources is a problem. Sustainable management of practices of open access commons, because again, when we say aquatic diversity, like Patricia mentioned, we're talking about commons and discussions on that or papers on that, interdisciplinary work on that, I think we really need to do to understand enablers and barriers for promoting traditional knowledge practices for sustainable use in common food resources. So examples of that, I don't think it's there. And then the science policy practice interface. So scientists are doing work on one direction, policy people are in one direction, practitioners are again in a direction. So the communication between them, so horizontal communication, I think in many of this is lacking. And I would recommend, some of these recommendations come in as a kind of a repository to bring together work on traditional knowledge practices for management of aquatic resources in community land and in commons of Northeast India, because the work is so scattered, is I think an important thing that can be done. Also, how do we strengthen this research and practice and policy linkages? I think even Sir from the Forest Department was saying that, because again, to bring these out is very, very necessary if you're really talking about sustainable management of commons. Also strengthening linkages between aquatic resources and food security. I mean, a lot of it's like a food kind of a thing is there, but how do we link it to food security? Also as a resilient food system. If you are talking of resilience in climate change, then the discussions around that, and also livelihoods opportunities in Northeast India. Also some kind of an entrepreneurial or some kind of income generating activity for even communities. Scaling up and replication, I'm a little conservative about using this. Nonetheless, I've used this over here. I think how do we, if there are good practices going on, how can we also, replicate this? I think replicating or, learning kind of things for doing this is important and can be done. And also, I think strengthening the documentation of diversity of aquatic resources and traditional knowledge practices in People's Biodiversity Register is very, very important, because we have also been involved in doing People's Biodiversity Register for Arunachal in 3 districts. And I find that the aquatic biodiversity part is very, very poor. So I think how do we also include them? Then that becomes at a very, very grassroots level. If that documentation can happen even in the People's Biodiversity Register, I think that's very, very important. With that, thank you so much for your attention.